Good afternoon, everyone. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and shared after. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar discussing back-to-school anxiety, returning or transitioning to college. My name is Crystal Reynolds, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Family Institute at Northwestern University, where we, through research, education, and therapy, practice relationship-based behavioral healthcare and are committed to strengthening and healing children, adolescents, families, and individuals from all walks of life. On today's panel, we are joined by our moderator, Dr. Dawn Livorsi. Dr. Livorsi has over 15 years experience as a therapist, with much of her career focused on the clinical needs of children, adolescents, and their families. Having provided clinical leadership in a variety of therapeutic settings, including alternative school placements and residential programs, Dr. Livorsi is skilled at partnering with clients and the external systems with which they interact to resolve problems and promote well-being. On our panel, Dr. Livorsi is joined by Michael Goldstein, a full-time therapist at the Family Institute. In his treatment, Mr. Goldstone helps his clients gauge their individualized needs and provides techniques to best help them adjust. He offers a mindful approach where he supports the life experiences and coping mechanisms used by each individual person. And we are also joined by Mairin Wilkie, a licensed clinical social worker with over 10 years experience treating a variety of clients from different backgrounds, with a focus on emerging adults and individuals who have experienced trauma. Mairin utilizes her training in DBT, mindfulness, trauma treatment, CBT, and psychodynamic therapies to support individual client needs. Thank you all for joining us today, and Dr. Livorsi, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Crystal. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, everybody, for coming to what I hope will be a really useful conversation. So we'll just get started right away here. Let's start by first defining some of the factors that can cause back-to-school anxiety for young people.
So I think some of the most obvious ones are social anxiety and academic anxiety, especially around the transition to college for freshmen. It's a time where you're away from the group of people that you grew up with and that you've gotten to know over the past 4 years of high school, and for some even more, and a time that you're away from your family for the first time. So I think that in and of itself is really anxiety inducing, and then having to be amongst a group of sometimes hundreds or thousands of people that you don't know.
And just piggybacking off of what Mairin just said, it's also a time of like adjustment and change. The initial change is also can be pretty stressful, as far as, you know, going from your home environment to then moving into a space where there's a lot more autonomy, freedom, to go to sleep whenever you want, to go to class, go to different organizations, go exercise, eat. All of these things are kind of up to you as a college, or the person as a college student, and a major change from potentially being at home, and an adjustment that is worth talking about, having a conversation about.
Yes, agree with all of that. And I think also just the uncertainty, right? Students don't know. I mean, try as you might to prepare, and I'm a preparer. You can't predict all the things that will happen. So really tolerating that uncertainty, I think, is difficult, especially, you know, for those freshmen who have never done it before. I think especially them. So, okay, I think we've outlined some of the reasons that a student might feel anxious. So what are some recommendations for students who are feeling some anxiety about returning or transitioning to college?
Something that comes to my mind initially would be really thinking about routines. Going to college, especially like different days in college. I know, you know, classes on Monday might be different than classes on Tuesday, might be different than classes on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, etc. I would encourage my clients who are college students anyway, to really think about their routine, think about their day-to-day, it would be unadvisable to stay up until like 4 in the morning one night, and then 12 o'clock the next night, and then 3 in the morning. Like, try to have a bit of a routine there to help with kind of some stabilizing, some expectations, especially around, going to sleep and waking up. It can really throw off somebody's circadian rhythm, and therefore making it hard to fall asleep and hard to wake up in the morning. So I would highly encourage students to be thoughtful of when they're going to bed, when they're waking up, when they're eating their meals, to help with a lot of the ambiguity around scheduling and changes. I recognize that there are times where people are stay up later. There might be an event that runs a little later, or they might want an afternoon nap, as college students may have a little bit more flexibility to do. But I would strongly encourage students to be really thoughtful about trying to have some sort of a boundary around their routine.
I completely agree. You've been basically following the same routine for 13 years school-wise, right? Before you go to college. And it's very, very structured. And all of a sudden there's like, you get to choose the structure. So, I'm just adding to what Michael said, being able to choose your structure and following it throughout the day, making that your routine, even if there's a 2-hour gap between classes, trying to make sure that you're following a pattern that keeps you grounded. It's one thing to go from like 8 to 3 every single day, except summers for, like I said, 13 years. And it's another thing to all of a sudden be able to like pick what classes you want to take and when, and what do you do with that free time in between. So, just adding to what Michael said, anchoring yourselves in something that you can do like on a daily basis in between those times and at night.
Yeah, I think that's good practical wisdom of getting some structure in place for yourself, to just make your days flow a little bit easier. I think I like to share with students who are returning or going for the first time is to really lean into that growth mindset stuff. Really, you're there to learn, right? There's no way I think anxiety comes up a lot when we think we should know something that we don't. And I think if you can lean into the fact that I'm here to be a learner, I'm here to grow, I'm going to learn a ton, a lot of it in the classroom, a lot of it outside of the classroom. I'm going to make some mistakes. There's no way I can know all of this. That's actually what I'm here to do, is to develop. And so I think, along with the practical stuff, that mindset shift too into like a growth mindset, I think can be really helpful. And that's a practice. That's something that, may not happen day one, but just kind of reminding yourself like, yeah, how could I know everything? That's actually why I'm here. So I think that's a good reminder too.
And that, Don, just to piggyback off what you're saying too, like it's okay that it's all new. It's new for everybody. It's new for you, the incoming person, if it's a freshman, or and their peers and upperclassmen too. It's all a bit of an adjustment, and especially if it isn't so new, it is a bit of a challenge. And I would encourage also people that ask for help, get to know their peers a bit more, get to know their teachers, get to know maybe counseling staff or people at the university who may be able to help with that adjustment, because universities generally do have staff of all different sorts, from professors to TAs to RAs, or residential and administrative staff that can really support an incoming student. And so would encourage people to get to know people around them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna use that a little bit to segue into our next question, which is about what are some tools students can use to make connections and friends, especially if they've struggled with this in the past. And so, Michael, I think your idea of getting involved in those back to school events are really good. I mean, typically colleges do they want you to come in, find some people, get comfortable. You know, that first year in particular is a big one for retention. The schools that admit you want you to be successful. You know, they want you to be happy. They want you to do well there. That works for everybody, right? So I think that is one way to get involved, can help reduce the anxiety just about school in general, but also might help you connect to some other students who are in the same boat. But what else would you recommend for social connections?
So I think what you said, Dawn, about the, wanting to retain students is absolutely true. I don't think there's any university that I know of that doesn't have some sort of, especially for the freshmen, like orientation week-long or days-long event with lots of different activities for both the student and their parents. So I always recommend to my clients, if you're a freshman, get involved with that. If you're not comfortable, you can always leave. You're not stuck there, but it's a great way to meet the other people who are in the exact same boat as you. Some people might have friends from high school that are there. Some people might not, but like you're gonna be in a mix of people, and they structure it in such a way usually that everybody has the same opportunity to get to know their peers that are starting there too. So it's not like people go off in cliques right away or anything. You get to mix. Something else I always recommend is try to get involved as much as you can. If something mildly interests you as far as a club or like an intramural sport, sign up for it. You don't have to, like, if it doesn't, you don't meet your people there or it doesn't feel right, again, like you can always leave, but it's good. Even if you haven't played soccer, let's say, since 8th grade, there's lots of people who are in the same boat that like might just click with you because they joined the same intramural sport. So I always recommend like get involved with a lot right away. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. But at least you have the opportunity to make those social connections.
And I think we're probably going to talk more about this later, but especially with for parents who might be concerned about their adolescent going to school for the first time, maybe looking through with them what is available, what does their school offer for clubs, various activities, or like club, team sports, like recreational sports, even whatever is unique, or whatever your child or the person enjoys the most. I'm certain the school will have something that they can connect to, and if it's maybe something they want to just try or see how they feel about it, I would recommend more rather than less. It's always a good opportunity to get to know other people in the school, incoming freshmen, but also upperclassmen as well, who also went through all of this, previously.
Yeah. And I'm going to echo what you both said about routine. I think routine is a really great way to get to meet people. If you're in the dining hall at the same time every day, if you're in the gym working out at the same time every day, if you're in the library, you're going to start to notice some people that are also there. And those can just be some like, common things that you share, and maybe make the bridge to friendship a little bit easier. And also through your classes, I think you can maybe share some of the burden of the academic pressures by studying with somebody else in the class or working on a project with somebody. So using those kind of just natural things that you're already doing to build connections with other kids who are in the same boat, as we keep saying. But I think my biggest thing on this is it's unlikely that your new best friend is going to just show up at your dorm room. I mean, maybe they will, but my best advice is to be outside of your dorm room if you want to make friends. That's usually, I think, where that will happen. Okay, so we've talked about some of the general anxiety, some of the social anxiety. Let's move on to the academic pressures and coping with managing all that will be expected academically of incoming students. Some of the things that I like to share with my students is being smart is great. No one's ever going to tell you that's a bad thing, but that's often not enough to be really successful. You have to develop, I guess, what we would call some non-cognitive skills, things like time management, things like organizing, prioritizing, communicating, self-advocating. I didn't understand that. Can I, those kinds of things. And the good thing about that is those are all developable skills. Those are not binary, like you have it or you don't. Those are things that you can practice, you can get better at. Some of us aren't great organizers, but we can learn some tricks to get there. Same thing with time management. So I really try to stress, yes, the intellect, the smarts is great. And these are some things that you can also develop that will really help. So what other pieces of wisdom can we share on the academic pressures?
I agree with everything you said, Dawn. I would say it's good to be kind of reflective before you get to campus, especially now that you have time, to think about what made you successful when you studied. So was it the environment you're in, or was it like having reminders? Was it being able to study with a group? And to try to discover that within the campus itself. So if you know that you need to be like not bothered in a very quiet environment, go explore and find that space for yourself that you can get comfortable with studying. Most people, I don't know of any freshmen that get a single, rarely for any reason, but you're gonna have somebody that you're with 24/7. And I know a lot of high school seniors, do their homework in their room, and not everybody shares a room. So it's gonna be a different environment if your roommate's there wanting to watch TV and you wanna study. So go look in the nooks and crannies of your dorm, go to the library, look at different buildings and figure out what works best for you. Or that's another opportunity to meet friends, is there a class that you're struggling with? And you've heard other people rumbling about it too. Do you want to form a study group? Would that be really beneficial? So really reflecting on what has been successful as far as things you've done on your own in high school to make you smart and make you succeed, versus things that just kind of naturally fall into one's lap. And then tap into your professors. Most of them have office hours and they're approachable. That's what office hours are for. So using that resource of the person who is teaching this content being available just for you, designated hours of the day, and seeing what help you can elicit from them.
Great.
TAs, professors, they all want you to succeed. They really, they don't want to give people bad grades. They want to be there. They give office hours. TAs are also available to help students, to assist students in understanding the material further. That's part of something that they genuinely, from my experience, they really do care about. And on top of all of that, I know we were talking a little bit about exploring the campus or finding your work flow, what's best for you. I oftentimes might encourage people to think about, where they work best. I think we all gravitate towards the most comfortable places in our lives. I know lots of people prefer laying in bed than sitting in an uncomfortable wooden chair or whatever kind of chair and doing work in your bed, laying there. But I might encourage somebody that might be a bit, that might stop them from feeling very productive, feeling very good. I would encourage students to try to get out, use their desk if they want to, but truly to get out of their room, to go to the library, to go to a place that feels maybe a bit calming, or a place that you can really develop the context around. This is where I'm going to do my work versus my bed where I sleep, or my bedroom or my room where I like to watch TV and play video games or talk to my friends or, lounge really. I would encourage some boundaries around those things because, again, we all want to be comfortable. We all want to be in our most comfortable spot in our lives, generally our beds. But that can also hinder or make us feel pretty isolated. So I might encourage against that.
Yeah, that's a good advice there.
Yeah, I think that helps with sleep hygiene and the dysregulation around that happens too, is if you're doing everything in your dorm room, it can be harder to fall asleep at night when you want to. So getting out and really, like Michael said, using different spaces can help with avoiding some of that dysregulation that comes with sleep.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Moving on to the next question here. Do you have any preventative measures for back to school burnout and advice on how to better manage one's time? So amongst all these new challenges and changes, how do you still take care of yourself and still, not run yourself ragged?
First and foremost, the three things I like to tell everybody, like we don't necessarily get to pick out of a hat what we want to feel every day. We don't get to, choose what exactly what's going on around us, the amount of schoolwork, the amount of pressure. But the three things I would encourage students to really be thoughtful of are sleep, making sure they're sleeping somewhere between 7 and 9 hours a night, eating enough, eating periodically throughout the day, because that gives energy. Ideally, healthy-ish foods if they can. I know a lot of students get really excited about having unlimited food in the dining halls and what they can and can't eat, but I would encourage being thoughtful around nutrition, diet, and exercise. We need exercise. It helps regulate our bodies and helps, if we're exercising for 20 to 30 minutes a day, I mean, it helps to actually release endorphins and acts in a way to combat anxiety and depression. So I would encourage everybody to be thoughtful of sleep, eating, and exercise as regularly as I can.
I think self-care like that is super important.
Mhm.
I would also, echoing on that, in addition to the basic self-care, like what else do you do for self-care now? I have a handful of clients who I'm working with who are transitioning to college, and I think they would describe themselves as introverted. So it can be really hard for them to be around a lot of people all the time. And then expect to like turn around and like study and be academic, and not getting those breaks to recharge that a lot of introverts or people who have anxiety and depression before going into college have. So, tap on those resources where you can, whether that's like, I need breaks to call friends from home or call my parents, or do I need to find, I feel like I'm being a broken record here, but do I need to find a space within campus or my dorm that I can be by myself and kind of like just listen to music and recharge? So it's not like these resources, you can't pull things that work for you before into what's going on now. Just have to know the awareness and like use the tools available to you in order to do that.
And if
Yeah.
I can add on that too, I know we're all talking here, sitting as therapists. Also, an additional great check-in would be to find a therapist near campus, maybe associated with the university or outside of the university in the general area, whether it's teletherapy or in person, whatever feels right for the individual. Might be a great place to check in, see, to see what the student is going through. Are they taking the best care of themselves? Are they addressing social are they addressing their own social anxieties, or are they avoiding social circumstances? Are they aware of their burnout? Really use that moment if it's appropriate, if it's right for the student, to really check in with themselves.
Right. And the nice thing about teletherapy is like if you're in a rural part of the country or a rural part of the state, you can see any provider within that state. So like even if you're 100 miles away from the nearest city, you can try to find somebody who's in that big city that might have more resources to see for therapy. That's kind of the nice thing that's come out of, if anything's nice that come out of this COVID thing, it's like the teletherapy emerging.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really great. I'll say too, I have seen a lot of times counseling centers on campus will have sometimes groups, psychotherapy groups, but also just psychoeducation groups about like how to manage your time, how to, deal with common stressors, right? That college students might face. I am a big believer in time management. Give yourself time and a half. So if it takes you 10 minutes to walk to your class, give yourself 15, right? Give yourself a little bit more time than you think you need so you can get a drink of water, check an email, you know what I mean? So you're not feeling that intense urgency that things are, I'm late. I think that definitely feeds into anxiety and gets people escalated in a way that can be avoided if they give themselves more time. Now, again, that is a practice. That's something that you learn how to do. But I think a good rule of thumb, I always think if it takes me an hour to drive somewhere, I give myself an hour and a half, you know, that kind of idea. Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to parents too now. I think that this is not uncommon that when parents are sending a student off to college for the first time or returning to college, sometimes even just that, they can experience their own level of anxiety. So what tips would you have, or what words of wisdom would you have for parents who might be feeling themselves getting a little anxious as back to school, you know, shows up?
So it's really hard sometimes to let go of helping your child manage. So it's all completely normal. And I would say that, you know, some of the same resources that we've been recommending for the students, I would recommend for the parents as well. Especially, you know, not exclusive to freshmen, but like there are a lot of resources during that first move-in week for the parents, but also upperclassmen as well. Like those same resources are available to you. And if you're helping your child move in at that time and like that's not something you're familiar with, that would be a good time to like learn about that. You know, what resources can I direct my child to? What's available? What can I like provide from afar as far as that? The other thing I like to say is if you and your child have a good relationship, like feel free to call them, you know, and check in when you know, as long as you're not interfering with their day-to-day basis, like check in on them. That's okay. Or if you feel like that's not a natural cadence in the relationship, maybe set a time once a week to check in with your kid and see how they're doing. You know, especially if there's kind of times of day where, you know, it won't be intrusive to what's going on with their school day. Like there's lots of labs that happen at night, for example. So if you know your kid's going to be walking back at 7 o'clock at night to their dorm after their lab, that's a good time to call and check in with them. And, you know, also make sure that they're safe on their walk back. And getting a therapist yourself, if it's something you feel like you can't manage. I think that kind of goes without saying. I mean, that's what we're here for. It's not just for the child, but everybody has anxiety at times. So if it feels unmanageable, what resources are available locally to you?
You know, again, piggybacking off of this, you know, also like maybe touching base with your child, or your adolescent anyway, about, you know, what cadence makes sense for them, what like contracting with them about how to communicate, how to talk with them. You know, no one wants to seem like they're too much, but again, there's a fine line between caring and, you know, being very anxious or putting your anxiety on your child. You know, talking together, having a conversation about how that looks, and how it feels together might be helpful. I'd encourage vulnerability. I'd encourage, you know, honesty from parents to their kids, as well as, you know, just kind of opening the door for the kid for their child to communicate with them, to share what they're feeling about these changes that are happening as well. And just set the stage for it.
Yeah. I work with younger kids too. And one of the things I'll talk with parents about is the idea of co-regulation. So if the parent is highly escalated and highly anxious, the kid likely will be too. And I think the same thing would probably hold true in this case. So I think it's a tall order, but parents need to manage their own emotionality around this, and find a way to kind of communicate to their child, I believe in you, you got this, kind of sending a positive message. I'm here if you need me. Respecting the reality that your child is moving from adolescence into early adulthood. This is a developmental change, and that there will be some mistakes in that. That's clumsy sometimes, as any transition is. Not getting too worked up about that, you know, not letting that kind of knock you off your grid, but really trying to manage what comes up for you in service of being a good model and a good support to your child who may be feeling some of those same things. And that would be exacerbated if the parent is also kind of echoing them. So again, all the same things that you all said, you know, I think there are services for parents too. This is a normal thing that parents would feel anxious about, and to do your own work around that. And you can even model that for the kids, that I'm doing my own work on this, and it's helpful.
I think it's really it's completely normal is the other thing. Like, it's not uncommon to feel stress or like you're fighting more even before things go. It's like we said, it's a transition time. You're letting your child go off and become in a safe space, probably like one of the best spaces to learn autonomy as for their life as an adult after college. The best place for them to learn that, like, there's enough structure where they can't hopefully completely fall off the grid, and then there's enough freedom that they can learn to make those decisions that are really going to prepare themselves for adulthood. And the feelings that you feel at home, like, those are completely normal and a part of the transition of letting go and trusting, really. And I know that's really hard for a lot of parents, especially if they feel like, well, my child, I feel like they're not necessarily a studier unless I'm like nudging them to study. So it's hard to make those, to let go of some of those things. But this is like the perfect place to have those conversations, like you've been saying, Michael and Dawn, to develop like what the cadence is for how much you need to intervene and how much the child, or you're not a child anymore, but your adolescent needs going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any resources that are available that you know of that you recommend to students or to their parents to be helps during this time of transition?
The first thing that comes to mind is it depends on the student's needs. It depends on the individual. If there's a history of any challenges with different kind of styles of learning, a quote unquote learning disability, all schools have an office of accessibility or disability services. They may call it something different, but initially I might encourage a student to reach out to them to schedule an appointment. All schools have these offices that provide services, including like extra time and exams. Some may need a note taker or other services that can be very helpful. A quiet place to take an exam, for instance. It's a quite discreet service, but it is, they may reach out to a professor to let them know that this is something that's going on, but it can be very helpful in that adjustment. I would encourage a student who may need that to do so earlier rather than, halfway through a semester. That may be one, academic way anyway.
Mm-hmm.
On the same academic vein, I would say a lot of, especially for freshmen and people who have majors, there's always, I think, the opportunity to get some sort of advisor, either within your major or within just like the college. So maybe you don't know your major yet, but is there somebody in the dean's office, if you kind of have an inkling where you might want to study, that could help you with things? That's what they're there for. They know their resources, and they are able to direct you and guide you, and like they know the questions to ask to help you figure those things out. So I'd strongly encourage, like, even if you don't know, that's help finding a major is what a
Yep.
dean's office can do if you don't already have an advisor assigned. And I don't think that you necessarily have to have like a formal advisor assigned. You can just kind of pop in and like say, hey, I'm thinking about this and that. Can you please like give me some direction or help me with direction? So in addition to using the office for resources, if you need extended time or anything like that, I would just take advantage of the people who can advise you in like which way what to choose for classes and which way to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay if you don't know that yet either. I feel like some kids go in knowing like I'm going to be pre-med, and others are like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So there are people on campus there to help you, and you just have to know where to find them.
Yeah. And we've plugged it many times, but I'll plug too. The counseling centers are often great for assessing what's going on. Some things they may be able to treat in office, other things they may give referrals for other things depending on where you're at, but that's usually a good like first stop if there's a problem or if you need some additional support. They can often help, point you in the right direction. Okay, I think we've come to the end of the questions that we had selected. I'm hopeful that some came through, and I think Crystal will join us here to share if we have any.
Yes, great discussion and advice. We did have several questions that came in prior to the webinar. And again, if anyone currently has any questions, please do type them in the Q&A. But to get us started, I know you talked about, kind of adjusting going from high school to college, or if you've already been in college. But what about children or adolescents that have taken a break, whether a year up to 6 years? What's some advice on making that adjustment and having to really learn how to make new friends all over again?
My initial thought is it depends on the student and what their needs are, the person anyway. If there's some anxiety or increased anxiety even about going to school, making sure they're connected with mental health services, whether on campus or a therapist around or in the state anyway, could be helpful. I would highly recommend, if that's something that is a bit of a concern, to make sure that they're at least connected with somebody. They have an appointment on the books, and maybe that's not going to be their long-term therapist, but it's at least a start. It's a person they can touch base with and start to process what they're feeling about that change. In addition to that, though, I would encourage them to do everything we're kind of talking about for an incoming freshman. It's quite an adjustment. It's quite a challenge. Try to get involved with different activities, clubs, get to know the people around you, even if it's a dorm, or if it's not a dorm, making sure to attend clubs, events, things that interest you, even if it is uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll add on that might be a situation where you want to speak to an advisor before you start, because there are some schools that have what they call adult degree completion, or they have programs that are more geared for non-traditional students. So not the 18-year-old, but students who are a little bit older. And an advisor might be able to place you in a setting that's a little bit more comfortable and more likely, for facilitating friendships. So that might be a good one to kind of check in. Is there an option like that for a returning student who's a little bit older?
Right.
Great. We had a question just come in that we've actually got a couple of questions on, specifically for parents, and guidelines of knowing when to step in and to help or intervene, and when to hold back. Like, when does it become overbearing, or how much freedom do you give them before you step in without being the helicopter parent?
I would say, if there are certainly things that stand out more than others, so things to kind of be hyper aware of are not necessarily hyper aware, but more aware of are communication changes. If you're talking to your student a couple times a week, and then for unexplained reasons, meaning they don't have finals or some midterm or a big exam coming up, the communication drops off suddenly. They're not contacting you. You might want to try and get in contact with them just to check in. And I would say it's okay to ask, do you need my help? And if you feel like they're not going to ask you, say, well, I'm here if you do need it, and encourage them to reach out. The other thing I would look at, without, being too intrusive, is if you are managing bank accounts for them, or, paying off credit cards, is their spending increasing all of a sudden, or something like that. But again, you don't want to be too invasive checking it all the time. It's major changes that I think I would be more aware of than others. And also, I would say, at the same time, you want to be aware that patterns are going to change initially, right? Because this is a time of transition. So it's not necessarily that you have to be super alarmed about anything. Like I said, if it's 1 week where the communication drops off, that can maybe be explained by something like a test or something coming up. So just, learning those new communication patterns and feeling like you can really connect with your child about their needs, I would say, is really important.
I also think we all, as people in this country, and the stress of going to, grades and getting into schools, there's so much pressure on that, especially, from really, I guess it kind of starts from like K through 12. I would encourage parents to try to have some grace, initially, because it may be a bit of an adjustment. It might, the exams in college sometimes look and feel very different than the exams in high school. And there might be a period of time where a student may need an opportunity to, to adjust to that process. Maybe they're surprised by how much studying they need to do. I would encourage trying not to be punitive, especially in those first few weeks and months, noticing, asking if, what they need to, change things. Are they doing okay with the amount of work? More checking in rather than this, historical, and I'm just generalizing here, but the intensity of grades throughout, from K through 12th grade, it's a lot of work. And it's very intense to know, like, okay, now I got to go to the next level. I'm applying to college and whatnot. In this adjustment phase, I would encourage everybody to be a bit more aware of this change and just asking, what the student, what their emerging adults needs in this circumstance.
Yeah. And I would think, there's some things you can set up in the beginning. Like if you're giving them money somehow, or if you're financing something, I think you can say, like, here is your budget from me, you know what I mean? And expect them to learn how to live within that budget, and maybe not bail out every time. If there's an emergency, you're going to show up for your kid in an emergency. That's what parents do. But allowing them to figure out what the limits are, and to, make good decisions with their time, with their money, with whatever. The question that I think is important is what I'm doing helping move my child from adolescence to early adulthood, or is it pulling them back into adolescence, right? So a parent noticing that a child's grades are not great, if they're, logging onto their kids' grades, a parent who would email the professor, that is bringing your kid back into adolescence, right? That is, so you can, I think, offer support, you can offer suggestions, you can say, do you want to know what I think? But I think you want to, as a parent, allow your child to figure this out. That is the work that they're doing here. And again, as I said earlier, these transitions are clumsy and they're clunky, and there may be some missteps. There may be some overdrafts. There may be some, poor grades here or there, but hopefully your child will learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great. Another question, we got a couple on this. What are coping skills to address those that may feel the need to compare oneself with their classmates, or have feelings of inadequacy, or not feeling smart enough? What advice would you have for those students?
I would say it's a good, and this is something I tell all my clients who tend to compare themselves, is comparison is natural for human beings. Like, that's how we, as we evolved as a species, it helped to motivate us, right? But I encourage my clients to ask themselves, like, what is it that I want? And is this voice helping me get there? So is comparing myself to this person's grades and having a critical voice come out from myself, is that helping me get better grades? I would say most of the time it's not. So starting there and kind of evaluating, like, what is my goal, and is comparing myself getting me to my goal? And then what would? Generally, it's not the critical voice that's putting you down. That's not helping anybody. So what is more realistic? Like, what can I do that would be motivating to get my goal?
Yeah. I think what's that old adage, comparison is the thief of joy. I think that's very true in many cases. But I would see if also you could compare against yourself, right? Where was I 6 months ago? Am I, because you're running your own race. We're all running our own races. So kind of thinking about, where are the areas that I want to get better? And, I think comparison can be healthy if you use it as, how am I growing?
just to echo everything everybody's saying, I completely agree with both of you. And it's all very individual as far as how this is manifesting in the person, what their needs are, how this is affecting them. If it's feeling very debilitating, are they taking care of themselves? Are they doing, are your child as student, are they doing what they need to do, to manage their own individual feelings? Are they taking care of their mental health? Are they taking care of their well-being? Because college is a time where we grow, we learn more about ourselves. And are they really using that time to learn about their needs? So that's really, really important.
Thank you. One question is how someone would face anxiety if there's a particular person or an event that sparks dread or avoidance, like a particular coach or professor, or entering a large class or a practice. And these events can't necessarily be avoided. They really need to be faced to be successful. So what advice would you give in those situations?
Again, it depends on the circumstance, but the first thing that I wonder is how are they managing? We can't, as individuals, as people, we can't control the world around us. We can only kind of control our internal selves. We can make choices, we can make decisions that put us in situations that are different. But ultimately, I would wonder, are the students, are they taking care of themselves? Are they aware of how their anxiety, how their body is feeling? What are they doing to cope with their own emotions in some circumstances? And I'm being very general here, but it really depends on the circumstance. I would very much so encourage mindfulness. I would encourage breathing. I would encourage, really taking a moment to look at, how their anxiety is manifesting in their bodies and their minds.
I think anxiety has the power to kind of hijack our logic a lot of times. So trying to tap into the logic that's hijacked and ask yourself, like, what in particular am I anxious about? Again, it's very individualized, so it's different for every person. But do I know for certain that what I'm afraid of is going to happen? What's more likely to happen? What's another outcome? And if you're still kind of like feeling like those questions aren't helping you realize that maybe the thing you're afraid of isn't very likely to happen, that's when I would, echoing off Michael, like, can we work on what we're feeling in our body and focus there, like the ick feeling that comes up with mindfulness or deep breathing, or, can you, before you go to that event, can you take care of yourself somehow that you're calming down? A lot of times anxiety just kind of tells us that something's going to happen and we don't know what, or like it's not necessarily a certainty. So I would encourage people and especially for specific events, what is it that you're actually afraid of? What is the fear?
Yeah. And I would say if it feels like it's creating impairment, like you're unable to go into a class, or you're unable to communicate with a teacher, that might be somebody I would say the counseling center might be able to do some good work with you. I think some of those things are kind of, I think many of us feel some anxiety around that. But if it is stopping you from doing that, then that would be a time where I would say seek some additional support, because you deserve to be able to have those experiences, to go talk to a coach or to, enter a lecture hall. That's part of college.
A couple of questions on executive functioning and how they could do kind of a tune-up or work on their like day-to-day basics or executive functioning skills. Any thoughts or advice on that?
That might be one of those things, as we talked about, like counseling center having psychoeducational workshops. That's a common one of how do you manage time? How do you organize? If you have 5 classes, how do you organize? There are certainly some good texts out there, some good books around, resources out there that talk about making things really simple, chunking, taking breaks, that kind of stuff. I think, again, if that is, if you're talking about an executive dysfunction, if you have a diagnosed dysfunction, certainly be working with the Student Resource Center to get the supports that you need. They are available. And again, as I said earlier, like, these are developable skills. So these are things that you can continue to work on. You can try a system, you can tweak your system, that this is a time for you to be working on developing that. See if anybody else has thoughts.
Oh, something I just wanted to add to that is it's also very individual. It's, for some people, they really enjoy like writing handwritten notes themselves, Post-its, even like what's it called, like an agenda or something where they, carry something physical with them, that the act of writing it might help them remember, but also have it written down, whatever, events they'd like to attend or when assignments are due. Another, it's just very individualized, and I would encourage maybe as parents to, ask your child, ask your kid how they prefer to do this, what's best for them. I wish I could say there's a one size fits all formula that you do these things and you're just organized now, but for all of us, we're quite different, and some of us thrive in writing things on our phone as text messages to ourselves, and others prefer writing them down, and others are just really great at remembering everything. Kind of just depends on, the individual person.
I would just add quickly that I think even if you don't have a diagnosis like ADHD or autism or anything that's like specified around the Student Resources Office, I bet like you could walk in there for most kids and say like, what do you have? Or like, what tools do you have? And they would be able to help. I think that's their function, and they're not just there to help the kids with the diagnosis. So I think that's an excellent resource for everyone.
And/or therapy, right?
Yeah.
Use that as a moment to really check in with, your functioning mental health wise, but also like organizationally.
Calendars, timers, there's lots of apps, there's things that can block out the internet so you can just be not distracted. So there are tools out there for people if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. One question came in about remote students and how do they connect if they're wanting to make connections.
My experience is that online programs try to offer many of the same things, or try to include many of the same things that an on-ground kind of traditional program would offer. So things like clubs for majors, you could probably still participate in remotely, or other just workshop events that a program might put on, you can still usually attend. I think schools have gotten pretty good at including. So I would look for those opportunities to still be involved in those things that are, more easily available to students who are on ground campuses.
And maybe if we're also talking about from an academic standpoint too, making it a point to reach out to a professor if there's something that your child doesn't understand, or a TA even, like I'm certain they're all happy to make time to connect, especially with students who are remote, who are, not really on campus to stop in or stay after class to ask a question, because usually a, remote class will end, reaching out over email, making an appointment, from an academic standpoint, professors, TAs, they look fondly on those things, truly. So would recommend that.
Great. I think we can get one more question in. And I know you guys have given a lot of great information and advice about ways to get involved and kind of find your people. But what about those students that tried that last year and they never found their people, or it just didn't happen for them? What is some advice that you can give them going into their sophomore or junior year to overcome that anxiety?
So I think there's a lot of pressure that, and I think Michael said, or Michael or Dawn said something about like, you're not gonna, your best friend isn't gonna walk up right away. You're not gonna meet them right away. You might not click with your roommate freshman year if it's somebody new. I think that's kind of that does happen for a lot of people, but like myself included, like I don't think I met my good friends in college till sophomore or junior year. And I think that's just kind of like an expectation that we have as a society, that like when you go to college, you meet your people right away, right? But that's not necessarily the case for everyone, and that's okay. So again, getting involved in different activities or looking at like a study abroad program where you're going to be grouped with different people under different circumstances, that can really help get you amongst people who you haven't met already yet. And I would say also just don't put so much pressure on yourself if you can, that like it has to be now or it has to be these people. Explore different clubs that might expose you to new people, or like look at different activities that might get you involved with people that you haven't been exposed to before. It's not something that has to happen by a certain time.
I think it's actually, I'm thinking about my own experience. So I'm a social worker. So your first 2 years are kind of general. And I think it's the same for many, many disciplines. Then your junior year, you're in your major. So I don't think it's uncommon that, you may kind of, I don't know, maybe not quite find your group until you're in your major, where people share some natural commonalities, are similar minded. So I think it requires a lot of, I think, bravery and resilience to try it again. But I think if you try it again, you might find that, when I'm in my major and I'm around people who are like-minded, I might have more success.
And you're going to have the same classes with those people
Yeah.
and over again too. Whereas you're, like you said, if you're in a general studies program at first, it's so many people, but you meet people through repetition with those classes too.
Want to stress, like, it's very vulnerable. It's very hard to try something new. It's very hard to try a new club if the other two clubs that you tried last year didn't work. It's very hard, but it's also important to work through that. It's important to continue to try new things. You never know what's going to stick, what's going to feel right, what professors, what subjects might actually connect with you. I know my personal life, my minor in college ended up being Greek and Roman classics. Never really knew much about that, and immersed myself in this community of people who are like going on archaeological digs. I found it so interesting and never would have expected that going into college. I would encourage you to continue to try to see what's offered, what events, what shows or concerts are available through the college, and keep trying.
That is a great way to end this conversation. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our panelists again, and we will share this recording after the webinar. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.